or in some cases to give credit, a sector like telecom, where they were very deliberate in regulation. I was speaking to one of the most senior executives in telecom recently, and they said the foundation that was laid for telecom regulation by the first NCC chief is still holding, but it's falling apart a little. That is the reason why the telco have grown. So, right, let's be clear also as what we, we take in everything. Oh, IFRS 9 is, there's an accounting graduate here. They say IFRS 9, we jump on it. They say, Basel 3, we jump on it. Some of these things will kill us. Our economy is not in a situation where it can take the cost of this regulation yet. And our government love regulation, so they will take it on board, right? And so, yes, the pathway forward for us is to recognize that the entities, the baseline entities, whether it is a gated community, whether it is a literary society, whether it is a corporate, every one of us needs to start to think of ourselves as the ultimate decision-making, because we cannot change the top. We have to improve ourselves before we can change the top. And so the power genuinely can lie at the baseline. Okay, it's on the back of technology, someone with a computer, like you said, but on the back of community, we need to recreate communities that are more powerful than the government.
Well said. Very, very well said, Mr. Suleiman. Do you have any comments on that, both of you?
Let me buttress that. I think I want to pick from the last thing you said, which is that Nigerians make up Nigeria. Nigeria doesn't make up Nigerians. And oftentimes, I feel like when we talk about our leadership, we don't point and high on ourselves, because we are our leadership is a reflection of who we are. As much as we think that it's because of them that who we are. If you think about almost everyone that is in a leadership position in Nigeria, I don't think there's any proven fact that anyone came from anywhere else apart from Nigeria. They grew through the system, and they became who they are to lead our society. And if we want to see the changes we want to, that will lead to progress, which I believe is everyone's desire, I think it's important to address it at the self level, at the first level of self-regulation. Mr. Suleiman did say, habit in itself pretty much gives birth to the outcomes of your life or to the outcomes of your society. And if we manage to get government to a place where the laws of our society starts to govern our habits, there's this saying that almost for every 11 people in the UK, there's a camera. And that pretty much conditions how a person thinks about even surveillance or about society. So if we can get ourselves to a place where the laws of our land becomes almost a guiding principle, or becomes gets to a place where it becomes what is orchestrating and guiding our behavior, I think some change can happen. I slightly disagree about naivety. I think naivety in itself is an ingredient for hope. Before you can start to think about something else, you have to first, start to live in some sort of sense of, wow, my reality doesn't exist. Let me start to think about something else that could bring about change in my life. But naivety, however, wouldn't take us to where we need to go to. We need some sense of consciousness. And what do we need to be conscious about? We need to be conscious about the fact that even though it's no more slavery, maybe physical one, it's not out of the mind. And are we going to invest in our own media? Would we have a source of information that will be different from how we're consuming information today? Are we going to invest in our own social media networks, really, that will provide for us the means and the mechanisms to engage with ourselves and to kind of build a frame of our own, build a frame of our own mind? So I want to just buttress what you said. I largely connect with it. And I think that if we start to make, I think every ingredient we require to make the change is present. Whether we will mix those ingredients together appropriately at the right time is now left to every one of us to play a role in, just to contribute to what you do.
It's very good, and it leads me naturally to my next question, because in your presentation, towards the end, you talked about the importance of science, but also the importance of art, and the importance of festivals like this, like Ake Festival. And I know, Mr. Suleiman, with your work at Sterling Bank, that's something that's very important to you, as a bank, to also invest in creative opportunities. So what role does the creative aspect play in this sort of, inclusive growth? Where can you see creative festivals like Ake or scholarships, things of that nature in expanding economic growth in Nigeria?
Okay, I guess that played that into my hand because I was just thinking about that in my head. There are two stories I can tell you, and both of them will sound true. Life used to be good in the 70s. Life was good, education was excellent, power was working. That's the story you've been told. What nobody has also told you is that in 1970, the total population of tertiary institutions in the country was 19,000 plus. In a population of 57.7 million, only 19,000 people were anywhere near a tertiary institution. Of course, life would be good, right? If we took all the money we had in this room and gave it to one person, the person would be rich. That's the problem, right? People tell you about how the current generation look back sometimes and wonder what the previous generations did. Did you fight? Why are we here? Except for one thing. This generation is fighting police brutality. The generation before that fought military rule, right? They got us democracy, right? The right to write. People wrote and ended up in jail before that. This generation that you look down on, well, without them, you wouldn't even be able to write. But the people died. We marched against the military. But the generation before mine, what did they do for me? They went to war. Right? Right or wrong, whatever side on it you were, they were at war. These people fought to keep a country together. And then the generation before that did nothing for them, well, they took out us independence. They brought us independence. They took us from being a country that was owned by an old woman somewhere down the road to a country that is free to aspire to whatever it wants. Hello? I think people have been making progress, right? And the generation before them, their parents were slaves. Right? So when people think, and if you want to write your story, think of a story as it's a thread. If you draw a thread that is going down, who's going to waste time stretching that thread, right? Think about the graph. But if you think it carefully and you see a thread that moves from Nigeria per capita income 1960 of $93 to 2,100, or life expectation that moved from 36.9 years and is trending towards 60, then you realize that there is a reason. But that is the work of the art. That is the work of narrative. That is the work of storytelling. That is why it is, I get upset when people think that the art, it's something you do on your pastime. It is the reason the future will exist. Without it, there is no future. It's the story we tell. And I've been asked many times, why do we support Ake Festival? Well, the truth is that it's not an easy decision to make, because it's not a commercial decision. But yet, at the heart of it is the most commercial decision we can make. Because if people had done this 20, 30 years ago, we would have a more inclusive economy today where my business would thrive.
Thank you very much for that. I think in addition, just to also buttress his point and add to, just your question, there's a saying that talent is evenly distributed, but opportunities are not. Ake Festival is a celebration of beautiful minds. And I strongly believe that Ake Festival can inspire anyone, anywhere. All you need is your mind. You don't even need a laptop. You don't even need a phone. All you need is your mind and a pen. And you can truly make magic happen. And that's also part of it. Yeah.
Brilliantly said. So this one is Fantilola, who keeps saying that this is the last one. I hope you're listening. Okay, so we have...
Just on that conversation about Antilola, I told the team downstairs that this is the last one that is about Antilola. From now on, it's going to have to be about all of us, right? This is now the point where Ake Festival must now become a community asset, and if it lives or dies, it's up to everyone in this room. It's no longer about Antilola.
It's wonderfully said, wonderfully said. So we have a presidential election next year. I don't know if if you've heard. And, we have a lot of political candidates running for election. I'm going to stick with the presidential ones. If we had the presidential candidates in this room today, and we were asked to advise them on inclusive economic growth and expanding the opportunities for Nigerians, let's take away any context of who those candidates are. Let's not try and bring anything to it. But what would you say to them, to those people who might lead our country? Yes, please go first.
Okay, this was an easy one. I sort of analyzed the spending of government over the last couple of years, and I realized that less than 10% of what government spends goes into the rural area where 50% of our people live. So it's no surprise that those 50% want to come to where the 90% is being spent. Rule number one. Number two, when you now go into the 10%, at least 75% of that, 7.5%, is probably consumed by the men in those societies. So the women, who account for 25% of our population, get 2.5% of what government spend. Yes. About 50% are in the rural area. And of that 50% in the rural area, they don't get more than 10% of government investment. And of the 10% that goes there, at least 3/4 of it is taken by men. So women accounting for 25% of the rural population get 2.5% of government spend. You're wondering why you don't have inclusive growth? Of course, you've excluded them by policy. So rule number one is top line. When you get a budget, cut it. 20% of this budget is going to rural communities, period. Before debt deduction, before interest payment, before anything, 20%. Right? It's going to go into rural community. Then within that rural community, you can spend what is going to go on healthcare, what is going to go on education, what is going to go on access to market. But at least it has to be a commitment to make the rural economy viable. That's my number one advice. The government to make it equally available. So today it is made available to the few. Because there are 2 million people in a population of 200 million in tertiary education. Government pays for about 95% of those who are in government schools. It is not available to everyone. Who are the people that is made available to? Those whose parents are wealthy enough to afford higher quality secondary school. They're the ones that do well in JAM. They're the ones that do well in WAEC. So what you've done is you've created a system where the government subsidized tertiary education is only accessible to people whose parents are upper class, doing well, or they struggle, but at least they are better than the rural and the poor. That model itself is the basis for unequal access to opportunity. What do you do about that? Take that funding and use it to equalize opportunity. Make it possible for every single person to be able to get their kids to have an education that is good enough for them to be able to compete for the tertiary. And then create a private sector model. If we think education is an investment, then it can pay back. What makes an investment is that you can put $10 in it and get $15 back. Put 100 naira, get 200 naira back. So it can pay back. If it can pay back, let the beneficiary of the education be the one to pay back, not the society, because the society cannot afford to pay back for everyone. Again, these are things that we take and we are not ready to deal with, but they are destructive to the idea of equality. So 2 ideas: put money in the rural communities. Secondly, make education more available, but not just the kind of certificate-led education that we have now. It is going to be job-led education. In other words, let education happen in the place of work. Education happening in ivory towers is designed for you to become a professor. Education that happens in Sterling Bank is designed for you to become a banker. That's the kind of education we need.
Amazing, amazing. I'd love to hear your thoughts from a tech perspective, because I know that you work in fintech. Fintech is something that's growing in Nigeria. Is there something that you would tell the candidates if they were sitting here today?
What Mr. Suleiman has spoken about as investing in rural areas as break down the population. So our problem size is too massive, and it's better if you break them into smaller components. And that's really what rural is about, or the various tiers of government. How do we move our problem size from this massive health problem, or massive education problem, or massive power problem, to a power problem in a community, to a power problem in a... So just break down the population and break down the idea of development into smaller populations. Second will be, make sure we get everyone to get access to childhood education, get government's money out of higher education, in my view, and transfer it to industry. The reality is that, I don't know how interviews go with you, Mr. Suleiman. We could put out a job and we can have 7,000 CVs or 7,000 applications for 2 roles. And you spend time going through these 7,000 applications, and you still need to go do a second round of asking for applications, right? So it means that if we're not satisfied with the people that are sending to us from schools, don't worry, I can actually teach them what I need them to learn myself, right? And maybe if education gets transferred to industry or get partnered with industry, we can give these people more practical skills that can earn them a living and earn them a real skill, really. I think that'll be the second thing. The third thing I would like to say is that government should get out of business completely. Government has no business in business. We can't live in an effort society. We just need to live in an outcome society. Don't pay anyone for any business opportunity, for any contract, just create incentives that ensure that people go invest their money and the outcomes show up. And don't even be involved at all in any business. Don't build roads, don't build infrastructure. Just create the mechanism for those things to happen and govern them through your incentives and through the laws. We can't abandon the law. I want to say this lastly. We can't abandon the law. We need to live in a lawful society. Someone needs to, once again, pull off those canes and get us into a lawful society where there are rewards and there are consequences for actions. And that'll be like my contribution. I think that will help fintech.
Yeah. I think I'll pick it from the last thing you said, or the second to the last. Government literally has no business in business. Government should just focus on the rule of law, focus on security, and focus on creating an enabling environment. And I think every other thing, the society in itself, will naturally provide equitable growth for us as an economy. And I think second advice I'll give to the candidates will be to really focus on human capital, but tactically focus on human capital. Sometime a bunch of years ago, about 5, 6, 7 years ago, we had an opportunity of working with a development enabler to hire about 500,000 people, train all of them, and put them into jobs. Put them into jobs for about a 24-month period and paid them. Now, we didn't just do that, we also followed the money. So you could, just like you're speaking about rural, there's a particular lady who literally goes to the top of the hill in Plateau State to get signal for her phone. That was how she got to apply for the job. That was how she got to know she had gotten the job. And every month, that's how she goes to get her alert, or her salary payment, or confirm her salary payment. But I think the point is, if you genuinely focus on human capital in a very tactical way, and you get, all of the nepotism and everything out of the way, there's a significant amount of growth you'll see. Now, following the money, what we found was there's someone who maybe couldn't afford to, there's someone who called akara for non-Nigerians is a bean cake, right? It's made of beans. You could find someone who couldn't afford to buy akara before, but just because of this, now they can buy akara. Now, you might think it's just the person being able to buy akara, but the farmer can farm more beans. The person that sells oil can sell more oil just because the demand at the microeconomy has increased or has changed. Focusing on human capital and really, really driving it has immense value, even down to the microeconomy in ways that we can't even begin to imagine. Yeah.
Very much. Thank you very much. That was great answers from all three of you. We have to move to the Q&A portion of the talk now. I hope that there's some lovely questions in the audience. So if you have any questions, please raise your hand. And if they are directed at anyone particularly on the panel, just let us know. We'll take the first two. So him and him.
All right. Thank you very much. Wonderful panel. I have a couple of comments and questions. I know
It's just one question, if you can.
Okay, I know Mr. Suleiman loves numbers so much. 22% of global youth population is in Africa. That number is going to actually double by 2060. So what kind of, this population are going to need jobs. Otherwise, they are just going to grow up angry, frustrated, and we might have even more violent societies. So what are the necessary investments that we need to make right now to make sure that those hands are going to be productive and they are going to be well employed and skilled? My second slight question is, I disagree. Government can be an incredible force of good. We just need a government that knows its role in everything that it gets involved with, because governments have a longer timeline than private corporations. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I think I'll quickly say that government can be a force for good. It's a question of what will be their role in that for good, right? There are different roles they can play. Back to the, I think that your question is enough on its own. What do we need to do so that this population bulge doesn't become a crisis for us? I think the first thing we must do urgently is to recognize where the opportunities are or will emerge for that population, right? Where will they be needed? Some will say, will they be needed in the farms, or are they going to be needed behind computers, or are they going to be offering services? So that we invest in education based on the projection of where the opportunity lies. The immediate opportunity, and that has to start now, is that there's everybody complains about Jakwa. That is because there's demand for that workforce. The question is, how can we solve that problem without creating the imagined immigration crisis? Let's be clear, if Jakpa continues for another 5 years, they will face a backlash in their home, their new home, that would make them, right? It's inevitable. The way to avoid that is to think of how the services of these young people can be available to the global economy without them necessarily having to relocate from the continent. And there are a lot of skill sets that allow that, right? So the first thing is, let us invest massively in the skill set that means that we can insert our people into the global value chain without our people physically having to relocate, right? And the way we can do that is to not depend on government to fund ASU, to fund education, but instead to create a model that means that a huge amount of capital, local and international, we fund our people to acquire the skills, and then we can insert them. So is it possible? Yes, but it requires us to have action now. And the current tertiary education system cannot produce that workforce. It's got to be a parallel system.
The young man over there. Is there a mic? Okay. Okay. You can go first, and then after that, you will go as well.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Earlier, well, first of all, the question that was asked earlier is, will we see inclusive economic growth in our lifetime? And many people said yes. I said no, because really it's a question of how old you are. My lifetime, how many years do I have left? So I know certainly I will not see that in my lifetime. But it's good to hear whenever people talk about economic growth and opportunities in Africa, we always talk about the fact that the human capital is the most important resource we have, rather than the oil or other minerals. That is all well and good, but I think we always have to think of the effect of the skyrocketing population growth that we have in Africa. It's okay to have an educated, it's very good if we could have an educated population. But the fact of the matter is, the way our population is going, it's really almost impossible for any government to really give the education that is needed. So it always makes me wonder, which comes first? It's like you ask, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? The government does not have the resources to educate everybody and give them the right opportunities. So why don't we, at the same time, think of how we can bring down our population, or at least reduce the growth rate? I think that is very important, because unless we do that, it's going to be really difficult. Like Mr. Suleiman mentioned earlier, that in the 70s, I think there were just like 19,000 undergraduates, but now we have millions and millions, and we all know resources are not getting any better. In fact, it's the other way around. So really what I want to hear from you is, what do we do about our skyrocketing population growth in Nigeria?
Sorry, I have to jump on that one. The irony is that the most powerful tool for moderating population growth is education. Like imagine all the other, we've tried. In China, they had enough power to put a gun to everybody's head and say, if you have a second child, I pull the trigger, right? I think the problem with democracy is that we can't really do that anymore. So the most effective way to moderate population growth, based on all of the options that we've seen, is education, especially girl-child education. How do you get girl-child education? Because the problem is even bigger in the rural area than in the urban. Take resources to the rural. When you take resources to the rural, make sure that those resources go into education, right? So I hear you. Education is not just for skills acquisition, but it's also to change the mindset, because democracy does not allow us to deploy other tools to moderate population growth. Now, the next question then becomes, how do I draw a nexus between human resources and the material resources that we have? The reason why education matters so much is that the value of a ton of cocoa it is determined by the education of those who have contact with it. The person who is a village farmer will sell a ton of cocoa. At best, he dries it on the ground and sell it with a stone. The person who has some level of education, technical education, might process it into some basic form, and so the value goes up by 2 or 3 times. The person who has some more advanced technical education might build a factory. So education again ensures that the value of the other resources are multiple of what we get today. So in a sense, every time you look at what is the single most important thing, if you could do only one thing, I will educate people. Only one thing, because that's the one thing that ties it all together. And that's why we keep going back to it.
Thanks, Suleiman. Really inspiring, just hearing what you're sharing. I think just to buttress this as well, I think it's education. But another question that I want to pose or ask on what you asked is, what type of education do we really need? And is it the same education that we've always had? Because if it's the same education that we've always had, I agree largely with you that it may be almost impossible to get it to everyone in this size of population. But if we map the opportunities that will exist in the future and exist now, we need to train people. Almost in every community in Nigeria, there's some sort of natural resource they have. But the people around that natural resource are not educated to make the best of that natural resource. If it's in Ondo, you find something. If it's in Taraba, you find something. If it's in Osun, you find something. However, everyone there goes on, keep learning biology and biochemistry. They may be disconnected from the resource that they have, right? Or they keep learning, I don't know, just something that just means they're going to end
Egyptology.
Yeah, Egyptology, right? That just doesn't even connect to the opportunity around them. So I think if we accept the inevitable, and the inevitable is that we'll be double in 30 years' time, I think our level of illiteracy right now, there's no means to stop that. Because we're not producing goods, we have to be producing children, you know? Seriously, so because if we're not producing goods, it means we're not educated enough. That means we're now applying that energy somewhere else. So it's almost inevitable that we will get to this double population. However, if we're on our way there, are there changes we can make to redirect how our people will learn? The another truth is that the world will need labor. The real question is, what are going to be the times now? Because the world has come to get labor from us before. I mean, I don't think it's new. It was called slavery, it's called brain drain. And I mean, there's always a new terminology to describe the world asking for labor from Africa. The world will always need labor. We just need to change the terms. I don't even think it's bad that people have the opportunity to go abroad or go work. If you can't control the flow of water, then you build a pipe to direct it. So how many pipes can we build to direct where people are going, what people are learning, what people are experiencing? I think that is achievable. I think that's really achievable. And I'm kind of looking forward to that word, really. Thanks.
It's a very good metaphor.
Yeah, so I just wanted to add, a few additional things as well, ma. Back in the day, we had a lot of initiatives. And if you looked at those initiatives, some of them proved to be maybe quite effective. There was a family planning program at some point that it had an impact on our population growth, at least within that period. There was Better Life for Rural Women. There were a number of those things. But the challenge has always been, how do we just consistently continue it? We have a plague of wanting to just restart in Nigeria. So almost every 4 or 8 years, we are kind of just finding ourselves restarting things. And I think stemming those things, figuring out the right type of initiatives to actually implement, is might be much. I mean, it might be a part of lower resistance than attempting to maybe just cut it off as cold turkey as the case is. Then I think secondly, around education, the truth is, I agree largely with Yomi, that we need to completely reimagine education. Today, the National Bureau of Statistics, as our last check, said 49% of our graduates were unemployable. Not that they're unemployed, they're unemployable. What that means is they just went to university for 4 or 5 years to waste their time because they are just unemployable as the case is. If that's the case, we need to really figure out how do we channel our human capital into something different. I remember a day I was going to the office, early in the morning, maybe around around 9 o'clock. And I saw this little girl, so like a group of little girls kind of walking to school and all of that. They looked stressed, but what was just playing out in my head is, how many more years does this girl have to do this thing? She looked like she would probably be in like a primary 4, primary 5. So she still has maybe 12, maybe 15, maybe 18 years of doing this thing every day, only to get out of it and become unemployable. I think is really, a painful reality. And it's something we kind of just really need to reimagine. What does education mean? Who needs to go to a tertiary institution? And who needs to really focus on vocational? Because I think, our founding fathers attempted to do it, right? So there were universities, there were colleges of education, there were polytechnics and things like that. But right now, it's just a fad. I just need to go through a tertiary institution and have a certificate. But just returning back to those purposes in itself, or redesigning newer purposes or newer, just reimagining education in a way that fits in the 21st century is a very strong way to actually deal with that and achieve the education in a tailored way. Yeah.
Brilliant, brilliant. Thank you very much. We're just going to take one more question, which is the young man in the second row, and then that will be the last question for the panel. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, my name is Evans Ufeli. I want to state that economic growth is not properly measured in Nigeria. So every time government gets consultants to work these things out, at the end of the day, they cannot diagnose the problem, so they focus on something else entirely. It happened during the trader money and all that. Most of the people that were giving those money didn't need those money. I'll give you an example. I'm a lawyer, I practice in Lagos here. There was a time I had a client in one of the big markets in Lagos. And I charged the client thinking she's a market woman. I don't need to go overboard. Then while I was in the course of processing my brief, we had costs to get her bank statements and all that. And when I saw her inflow and outflow, I said, what? Are you a market woman? She's a market woman. But I cannot diagnose, I couldn't, so I shot myself. The same thing applies to this government and successive government and the ones to come. The informal sector is not captured. Our economy is actually larger than what we have in the books. But the informal sector is so huge, but it's not captured. So you cannot address it for growth when you don't have the right diagnosis. So my question, therefore, is this. How do we address the informal sector and its growth vis-a-vis the formal sector? Thank you.
So the first thing is that our approach is not to look at the growth figure as published by anyone, right? When you look at multidimensional poverty, you're looking at things that are real. We're looking at the Nigerian Jubilee Fellowship Program. When the UNDP, EU, and the presidency put it together, they wanted 20,000 people for the first cohort. 365,000 people applied. 365,000 graduates that have degrees that are unemployed, right? So Those are the things that we need to focus on, the things that we know for sure. And that's why the conversation still holds. However, coming back to, first of all, to confirm that you are right, if you look at the payment data, the formal payment data that goes through banks and other financial institutions, it's about 2 to 3 times, I think, of the GDP. It is possible that some of the payments do not reflect economic activity, but it is highly likely that at least half of the payments that goes through the payment system, some level of economic activity must have taken place. I don't think people just dashing each other money at that scale, right? So I agree with you, and I think it's important for a different reason. However, for the conversation that we're having here today, the things we want to deal with, they are clearly measurable. We can dimension them. For instance, for an economy to transit into a high productivity economy, you need to have about 5% of your population in tertiary institution. And the type of tertiary institution that leads to job, we are at 1%, we know that. So there is a gap of 8 million people that need to be in school. And when you dimension the 8 million, you start to see where the falling out start. At the last leg is 1.7 million people applies for JAMB and only 400,000 or 500,000 get admitted. So you see the pull off. You now go back to how many move from junior secondary to senior secondary, you see a couple of millions. So when you pull it down, you see the exclusion. And so when we're dealing with this problem, we already know the problem. And I would round up, because I think we don't have a lot of time, by saying there are 2 things that I have been involved in that is intended to help. We have a deficit of minimum 500,000 teachers for secondary, primary and secondary school, and especially at the primary school. But we realize that there are millions of parents that have the capacity to teach at the lowest level, but we're just not equipped to teach. So we're taking the academic content for primary 1 and reducing it into entertainment content that can be mastered by parents and taught to children by simply bringing in the local languages as an overlay. And we're testing it now. We think it's one way to massively improve education when you don't have the infrastructure for formal education. Right? So education starts even before you get into a school. At the tertiary level, and this is the last thing that I'll talk about, we've designed a model that is intended to take anyone who can read and write, basic intelligence, between 9 to, I think, 18 months, give you skill sets and make you employable. And we've done that by working with people who have used technology to deliver skills. So people like Nextford, like Decagon, like Old School, we use them on one layer. The second layer is we're trying to embed these people in a workplace so that they get practical work experience, they actually know what it's like to be at work. And thirdly, and this is very important, because most of our brilliant people are not in campuses, they're actually in the various workplaces, we want to activate them by creating adjunct professorship, which means people like myself, I can take a short course that effectively prepares me to now become a teacher, and I can donate 5 hours a week or 2 hours a week and turn every meeting room in the workplace into a micro campus so that we can decentralize the educational process, take education out of the universities, and embed them. So imagine that a child has spent 3 years, because on the average, a degree now will take about 3 years based on our program. And in those 3 years, they've worked for 3 years as interns. So they've reported to someone, they've been mentored by someone. They've also had the chance of being taught their primary area of study by someone who has both the theoretical and the practical experience. And the last leg of it is we're talking to universities to bring them for a boot camp once in a year, maybe a 6 weeks boot camp. So in a single format, you get valuable academic education, intellectual component, you get work experience, you get physical experience, and it is paid for outside government. It is paid for by bank financing your education. If we do that, then we can scale from 2 million to 4 million to 10 million.
Okay, yes, back on it. All right. I feel like you're so apt. Like, I don't think there's any more to say to that. I just want to pick a keyword from everything you described and just say it's democracy is the answer. Get it to happen everywhere. In the homes, parents can administer teaching if they can't send their kids to school, if you give them how to do so. Get it to happen in boardrooms, in classrooms. Just ensure that whatever it is we're attempting to pass on to people happens everywhere. I grew up in a house, my mom is a teacher, so like by design, I grew up, listening to my mom teaching me everything. Now I'm teaching my children. My children are actually not in a formal school, right? So, and I feel like if every one of us could become somewhat responsible for this problem. Shanila always says something. He always says that inclusion is the responsibility of everyone. It's not the responsibility of government alone or responsibility of just corporate organizations, from the parents to the churches to the tribal gatherings to anywhere we all exist. Let's just figure out a way to democratize access. I think it's really brilliant or really great to learn the things you guys are doing, especially because of how it's structured across like various classes of people. And I would love to contribute to that in any form that we can. All right. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much for the questions, and thank you for listening to the panel, everyone.
Thank you so much, Aisha, Abubakar, Shane Demi, and Yomi. Please take your photographs.